Hi, I'm Ted Pattison. Welcome to the Office Developer Screencast Virtual Tour. In this video tutorial, we're going to talk about creating and using event handlers in Windows SharePoint Services 3.0. If you're familiar with event handlers on document libraries in Windows SharePoint Services version 2, you're in for a lot of new changes. In addition to what we had in version 2 with asynchronous event handlers, v3 adds new synchronous event handlers that fire before the fact, before the data is committed to the backend SQL database. So that means you can cancel the user's action. Additionally, support for event handlers is extended to be with lists in addition to document libraries, and not just with items in lists, but also for the list definition, the fields. So for instance, if someone adds a field to one of your lists, you can put an event handler to fire to respond to that or to cancel the user's action if you want to create a list that you don't want to support users adding and removing fields from. Additionally, event handlers are also supported at the site and site collection level. Well, let's start by looking at a SharePoint site. So here at the root of my default website, I have a brand new team site created from the blank site template. There's nothing that's been created inside here. So we'll go ahead and start by going to the Create page. And we're going to go ahead and create a new list. I'm going to create a custom list, and I'll call this Orders. And inside the Orders list, we're going to change the fields a little bit. And so what I want to do is I want to have this first column, which is going to be the title column. Now, note that I can't remove this column because it's the ID. It's the one that uses the ECB drop-down list. So inside of SharePoint, you can't remove the title column, but you can rename it. So I'm going to rename it to Order ID. And I'm going to make it so that the user doesn't have to fill in the information. That's what our event handler is going to do. It's going to automatically generate the Order ID for us by the end of the demonstration. We'll go ahead and choose OK. Now let's add a couple other columns. So the first column that I'll add in is going to be the customer column. And just to make this a very simple demo, I'll just leave that as a single line of text. And then the next one we're going to add in will be the order date. And so we'll add in the order date as a date and time and have that show date only and have today's date be the default value. That'll be okay. And then just because we're capitalists, we'll go ahead and stick amount inside there so we know how much the order is for. And now that we've done that, I'll go ahead and click OK. And so I have a very simple list right here, the orders list. So note if I go ahead and create an order, that I'm going to be able to put in a company such as Contoso, the order date, and the order amount. And then we'll go ahead and click OK. And what I want to do inside of our event handler first is write an event handler so that anytime someone inserts or updates one of these orders, it automatically takes the customer name and it appends it together with the order date to create a unique order ID, and it writes it back to the order ID field. So that's what we're going to do as part of our first demo. Our next step is to open Visual Studio and create a new project. So I'm going to choose new project, and I can pick either language. C# and VB.NET both work perfectly well. I'm going to pick C#, and I will create a new class library DLL project called Litware Handlers. And when I create Litware Handlers, I'm going to go ahead and it creates a class for me. So let's go ahead and rename this. And this is going to be the order handler. And also, I'm going to go ahead and add a reference right away because I know that I am going to be using classes inside of Microsoft.SharePoint.dll. If I go all the way down to the bottom, notice that there in Beta 2 are 3 Windows SharePoint services. If you scroll all the way over to this side right here, you notice that just the first one says Microsoft.SharePoint.dll. So that's the reference that you want inside here. Once we have the reference to Microsoft.SharePoint.dll, we can go ahead and create our event handler. So I'm going to go ahead and put in a using statement right there for Microsoft SharePoint.dll. And also, I'm going to do a Control-Alt-J, and let's bring up the object browser for a second. And inside the object browser, let's go ahead and look at Microsoft.SharePoint.dll, and inside the Microsoft.SharePoint namespace, what I want to do is I want to step through and take a look at a couple of different classes right here. So if I go down, notice that there is a SP Event Receiver base. So the different base classes that you're going to be inheriting from all inherit from this one common class right here. Now, in our demo, what we're going to do is we're going to end up binding to one which is called SP Item Event Receiver. And if I pull up this other side right here, you can see that there's item added, item adding, there is item updated, item updating. Now the way things work is that item updated fires after the fact, item updating fires before the fact. So the one with the ing is the synchronous before the fact event handler that you can cancel. The one with the ed, item updated, is the one that happens after the fact, after the commitment has been made to the SharePoint database. Now, in addition to SP Item Event Receiver, note that there's several others. For instance, there is, if I move down just a little bit, there is SP List Event Receiver. And so this is the one that's going to allow you to trap things like fields being added to a particular list. And note that you have both synchronous and asynchronous events here. I'm not going to demonstrate it here, but note that you could cancel someone trying to add or remove a field from a custom list that you have. Now, the one other one that I want to show is if I go down to the bottom here, there is a SP Web Event Receiver. And so if you use this type of event, you can attach it to either a site or a site collection, and they have site deleted, site deleting, and they have site or web moved and web moving. Notice that there is no web add, so that event is not part of the model. If you want to have something that fires when a SharePoint site is created, the approach is you have to create a feature. You create a feature receiver for the activated, and then you could add that to a site definition. Okay, but now let's go ahead and jump in and do our first work creating an event handler. So when we want to create an event handler, all we have to do is we have to know the right base class. So if I go ahead and I take a class and I inherit from SP Item Event Receiver, now I'm going to override some methods right here. So let's say that what I really care about at first is when items are added, I want an event handler for that. And also, let's create a second one. So also when items are updated, I want something to fire when that's going to happen. So here are two different event handlers that I have in place. Now, notice that they pass you a properties method right here. Now, let's say that whenever someone adds a new order or updates an order, I want logic that's automatically going to run, and it's going to take the customer field, and it's going to take the order date field, and it's going to append them together and write them back to the order ID field. Now, I could write redundant logic in both of these places, or we could come down here and we can create a utility method called generateID. And note that when I create this method, it might be handy to have the exact same signature as these other methods right here. So that way I can simply forward inside here and call these methods from the two different event handlers. So now both event handlers are simply forwarding down to the generate ID. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to get the SP list item. So if I get the SP list item, how do I get that? I'm going to choose properties, and I'm going to pick list item. So really they make it very simple for you inside an event handler because they hand you this properties parameter to go ahead and grab that list item. So now the next thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and grab couple different values. So let's say string, and we want to find out who the customer is. So if, and I just realized that I want to put that inside there. So if we say order, and then we're going to go ahead and notice that when I get that list item, I just have indexers. I can either pass the GUID, the ordinal, or I can pass the friendly string name. So if I go ahead and pass the friendly string name right there, that's going to be enough to get back that customer name. And then we'll say string, and now what we want is we want the order date. And so that's going to equal order. And we want to query in terms of the order date. Except this time we might want to put it in a special format. So if I say convert to date time, and then we go ahead and grab the order, and then we say to short date string, that's going to give us what we want right there. Let me make my screen a little bit bigger so you can see everything that I'm working on right here. Okay, so now we've gotten both the customer date and order, or the customer and the order date back. And so the next thing we want to do is we want to write back. So we're going to say order, and we're going to write back to the order ID. And the way that we're going to do that is simply by taking the customer field and appending that, and we'll put a space in between them, and then appending that back to the order date. And then the last thing we're going to do is, since we've made a change, we better say order.update to write our changes back. Okay, so really that's all I have to do to get my event handler up and running. Now let me just do a couple things to make this tidy inside here. And then we'll go ahead, and before we compile the code, we have to remember that this is an event handler for SharePoint, and it has to be deployed in the global assembly cache. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on my project, and I'm going to go to signing, and I have to have an assembly with a strong name. So under signing, I'll come down and I'll pick new, so I can just generate a new strong named key on the fly, and I'll just call that litware SNK, and I'll choose not to password protect it. So now all I have to do is build the assembly, and it will be built with a strong name, and I can put it in the global assembly cache. So let's go ahead and build the DLL. Tells me there's one particular problem right here. I'd need to put a toString on that. Now that I've done that, let me build it one more time. Things are looking good now. Okay, so now that we're all set with this event handler, let's go ahead and install it in the global assembly cache. So let's go down on my machine, and we'll find projects, and we'll find the litware handlers. That's what we're building. And once we find the DLL, I'm going to use my quick and dirty technique to put this in the global assembly cache, which is just to go to the Run menu and choose C Windows Assemblies and bring up the Assembly Cache Viewer. Once I bring up the Assembly Cache Viewer, I'm just going to take my litware handler and drag and drop it inside here. And once I've done that, I should be able to go to the L's and verify that my litware assembly is inside there. So there's litware handlers right there. Okay, so now that we've got the litware handlers in place, let's go ahead and move back to Visual Studio. Now, the handler is inside of a DLL, it's inside the global assembly cache. But our last step into getting just the basic hello world working is that we have to register the event handler. And there's two ways to go about registering the event handler. One way is to use a feature and use XML and an element inside of a feature. The second way is to do it through code. Unfortunately, unlike Windows SharePoint Services v2, there's no way to do it through the user interface. You have to either do it through a feature or through code. So what I'm going to do is do it through code by creating another project, and this time I'll just create a simple Windows console application that's going to run. And so this will be my handler registration app. And when I create this handler registration app, this is also going to have to program against the SharePoint libraries. So let's go ahead and add the SharePoint library to this console app, and we'll say using Microsoft.SharePoint. Now that we've done that, we're going to, when the program starts running, we'll go ahead and create a new SP site object for the hosting site collection, which in this case is going to be HTTP and then litware server 01. Now that we've created the new SP site object, we'll create a SP web object to reference our particular site. So we'll say site collection.openweb. And now that we've got the site object, finally we can say SP list, and we can say orders equals and site dot lists, and then we can just reference it by its friendly string name, orders. Okay, so now that we've got these pieces in place, now it's fairly straight ahead. Now I'm going to need two different strings. I'm going to need the string for the assembly name, and I'm going to get that in just a second, and I'm going to need the string for the class name. But once I get those two pieces right there, what we're going to do is we're going to say orders, and there is a property called event receivers on every single list. So I can say orders.eventReceivers.add, and when I do that, there's a couple different overloaded versions of this. The one that I'm going to use is the last one, in which I reference what type of event that I want, which is going to be, in this case, item added. That's one of the events. And then notice that you need the assembly name, so we'll say asm name, and then the class name. Let me make this a little bit bigger so everybody can see it. Now I'll create two of these right here, because notice that you have to call this once for each thing that you're doing. So one call to register the event handler for item added, and another one to register an event handler for item updated. Now the last thing we need to do is get the assembly name and the class name. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an old trusted friend. You can do this any way that you can get a strong name, but I have a utility that I use and many .NET developers use called .NET Reflector. And so if I use .NET Reflector, one of the things that I could do is I can go ahead and open litware handlers, and I can find the litware handlers DLL, and I can open that up. And once I do, it makes it very easy for me just to take this name, which is the assembly name, and take that and copy and paste it into my code. And then also for the class name, just to be safe, if I go back to Reflector and I go and find my particular order handler class, there's the namespace qualified name right there. So now that we've done that, we go ahead and add that inside. So now that we have all our code in place, let's go to the handler registration app. Let's set that as the startup program, and I'm going to hit F11 just so we can step through, make sure everything's happening properly. And as I step through, we create a new site object, and there are my autos down here. Let me tuck that down below, and we'll go ahead and we'll attach to the orders list, and then we'll go ahead and add event handler 1, and we'll add event handler 2, and then I'll just hit F5 to continue. And at this point, we should be able to test our work. So let's go back. Let's go ahead and take an order. And let's say we have an order for Contoso, and we'll just leave today's date as the order date, and the amount was for $1,000, so we'll go back and choose OK. And at first it says no title. Let me go ahead and do a refresh on this. And notice that because of the asynchronous nature, sometimes you don't see it. But once I hit refresh, we see that our event handler did indeed click in and take our two particular values and concatenate them together. The last piece we're going to do is to do something that we couldn't do in Windows SharePoint Services v2. Let's add an asynchronous, or we've added the asynchronous event handler. Let's go ahead and add in a synchronous event handler. So what we're going to do this time is we're going to handle the item deleting event. And if someone tries to delete an item, you can do all kinds of conditional code here to see if the current user is the same as the user that created it. You can compare two different values to make sure the data is valid. In this case right here, I'm going to do something really simple. I'm just going to disallow any deleting of items. And so what we do is we go down to Properties, and we're going to set an error message. And the error message is you cannot delete orders. And secondly, we'll say properties.cancel equals true. And really, that's all we have to do. Now, let's go ahead and compile our code. Now that we have compiled our code, I have to go through a couple more steps. One step is I'm going to have to go and reinstall the DLL in the global assembly cache. So one option that you could do is that you could put some events in the build process of Visual Studio to automatically automate what I'm doing here upon every build. And that is taking the event handler DLL, dropping it back in the global assembly cache. Also remember that those DLLs are going to be cached. And so what I'm going to have to also do is to run an IS reset so that the SharePoint worker process starts again and loads in the new version. And finally, when this comes back up, I'm also going to go have to register one more event handler. So now that it's back up, let's go ahead back to our program right here. And what I'll do is I'll add one more line inside here, and I'll comment out these first two lines. And this time I'll go and take item deleting, and I'll add that as the event handler type that we want to register. And then one more time we'll go ahead and I'll run an F11 to run through this code right here so that we can go ahead and register our item deleting synchronous event handler. Now that we've done that, let's go test our work. So when I go to our site and I go and I try to delete one of the event handlers, or I try to delete one of the orders, our handler should click in. Because I did an IS reset, it's taking just a second to start up. Now that it has, I'm at a particular event, and now as I try to delete this item, what you're going to see is that this is the standard beta 2 behavior. Notice that there's my user-defined error message right there. It tells me, the user, that I can't do what I'm trying to do and allows me to get back to the site.